I may lose a few subscribers over this one, but I never really felt that the character of Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, was really strong enough to warrant her own standalone film.
What? How dare you, Dave? Unsubbed? Maximum unsubbed?
Now, I always liked Scarlett Johansson's Natasha Romanoff, and I thought she developed as a character a great deal since her first appearance in Iron Man 2. But I always saw her as a strong supporting secondary character rather than a main title character. And by the way, I also think the same of Clint Barton, Sam Wilson, Bucky Barnes, Vision, and Scarlet Witch, and yet they're all starring in their own new series, so what do I know? Anyway, all that said, would I be opposed to watching a Black Widow-centric movie? Of course not. If it had been made 6 years ago, back when the original Core 6 Avengers were all in the fray and churning out their own independent movies alongside featuring in the Avengers ensemble films as well. Also, I would have preferred if a Black Widow film was made before wokeness had utterly taken hold of popular entertainment franchises like the MCU. For me, the moment to capitalize on the popularity of the character of Natasha Romanoff is just kind of past. It also doesn't help that the character herself is past as well. This film isn't even a prequel from that many years ago. It's a prequel that happens between Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. And so it's set during a period where Romanoff was on the run after violating the Sokovia Accords. Given where the MCU has gone in recent years and its decline in quality, every reference to other Avengers characters and moments made in this film just feels like a reminder of better times when the franchise was at its peak. The film takes on a grittier tone and feel, and this is reflected in some of the fight scenes and the cinematography. This seems to be an attempt to ground the action in a kind of more believable, Bourne Identity kind of vibe, at least at the start. But by the end, the film returns to the more typical MCU action beats that we've come to expect, including a few moments that thoroughly challenge one's suspension of disbelief. The famous Red Room, where all of the Black Widows were trained, turns out to be a giant cloud base that floats in the sky. I'm not even kidding about this. And the climax takes place while Romanoff is fighting Taskmaster as they're falling down to Earth and the base is crashing down around them. Don't think too much about the absurdity of the physics involved here. It's at Fast and Furious levels of face-palming stupidity. So much for trying to keep things gritty and believable. The basic story is about Natasha having to deal with her past, her former fake family life as a child in Ohio back in the 90s, created as part of a Russian undercover mission. The trauma of herself and her younger sister, Yelena, being taken and forced into the Black Widow training program, and discovering that the man behind the program, central cardboard cutout villain Dreykov, is still alive, and he's large and in charge of a global army of mind-controlled, super-powerful Black Widows. When Natasha's sister, Yelena, kills a rogue widow and is exposed to a red, misty antidote stuff, she also goes rogue and seeks out Natasha by sending her vials full of the antidote. Natasha is attacked by the Taskmaster, basically this film's Winter Soldier, a brainwashed, mask-wearing assassin. It's amazing how similar this film is to Winter Soldier in some ways. Without going into a painful plot breakdown, Natasha has to reunite with her fake parents and sister, find the Red Room, take down Dreykov, and set the other widows free. The plot is filled with extremely convenient, serendipitous elements that stretch the realms of credibility. This Red Room is apparently super secret, but without much effort, all of the connections Natasha needs to find it just kind of fall into her lap. It's pretty convenient that her fake mother just happens to be the one who developed the mind control process for the widows, and that instead of killing all of them in her home, Dreykov's soldiers arrive to take them to the Red Room anyway. Now, those of you hoping this film would be spared some kind of PC agenda, forget about it. This is a female-led superhero film made by Disney in current year politics, after all. Let's talk about the three most prominent male characters in the film. Rick Mason is a guy who helps obtain resources and a safe house for Natasha. He has merely a utilitarian function. Yelena and Natasha even poke fun at how sensitive he is. Shostakov, the Red Guardian, is a self-obsessed buffoon who, like Thor in Endgame, puts on weight so that his size can be played for laughs. This, of course, would never be allowed if the character were female. The final prominent male character is the villain, Dreykov. He's a white male misogynist who basically represents the oppressive patriarchy. I'm not even really joking there. In fact, the motivations of the villain actually undermine the entire basis of the Black Widow Red Room program from the start. Dreykov can use his global army of widows to start and end wars, as he says. He can tip the geopolitical scales in his favour. And he says that with Natasha, an Avenger, on his side, he can come out of the shadows, using the only natural resource the world has too much of. Girls. Oh, for bleep's sake, seriously? What an absolutely cringe-inducing women are victims feminist motivation for a white male villain, right? He built the mind control Red Room Black Widow program because there's an abundance of females on the planet? What, like 51%? Yeah, that's some abundance. If all you wanted was an army of brainwashed super soldiers, why wouldn't you pick men? There's nearly just as many of them. With genetically enhanced super strength, they'd be even stronger than their female counterparts, obviously. Or why not have male and female Black Widows? Then you'd have even more to choose from. This is absolutely ridiculous, and moreover, it completely devalues the whole idea as to why Black Widows were female in the first place. The Critical Drinker recently made a video called Defeminizing Female Characters, which I really recommend that you check out, because there's going to be some overlap here in terms of what I'm going to discuss. So first things first, women, generally speaking, not as strong as men. Controversial to say these days, doesn't stop being a fact. Unless, of course, you're talking about superheroes with supernatural abilities, in which case, fine. However, I think it was fairly obvious that in the Avengers, Natasha and Clint Barton were very much more vulnerable and much less powerful than the godlike Thor, Captain America, the Hulk, and Tony Stark with his Iron Man suit. So what were Natasha's unique abilities that made her an asset to the team? In addition to being stealthy, capable of manipulating people using clever psychology, she also happened to be a very attractive woman. Nowadays, of course, with modern current-year Me Too feminist politics, it's offensive objectification to even suggest such a thing. But it was true, and it was in fact one of her most potent weapons, which I'm presuming the Black Widows were meant to take advantage of. As an undercover operative in, say, S.H.I.E.L.D., an attractive Black Widow like Natasha could use a woman's superpower of the feminine. Female sex appeal, that which drives men wild, exploits a man's weakness, reduces him to a drooling mess, and allows her to extract information and resources or undermine and infiltrate an organization from within. Tony Stark is a super genius billionaire, and he was helpless to the devastating power of her beauty in Iron Man 2. He underestimated her physical abilities and was floored when he found out she was playing him all along and was in fact a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. Is this not why the name Black Widow was chosen for this character in the original Marvel comic books? The female Black Widow spider has this very striking marking on its back which looks like a red hourglass. That red hourglass is used as the logo for the Black Widow character. The symbol has also always featured prominently in her outfits. And what does a spider do? It lures in other insects, traps them in its web, and then devours them. Female Black Widow spiders are also much more dangerous than male Black Widows because they inject far more venom when they bite their victim. And the female Black Widows are very dangerous to the males because they eat them after mating. So let's take this analogy and extend it to a secret agent like Natasha Romanoff. Female secret agents lack the physical strength of their male counterparts, so they have to find other ways of compensating for this, and even developing an advantage as a result of it. An especially clever female agent could use not only her beauty, but her vulnerability to manipulate and deceive her male target.
You're a monster.
Oh no. You brought the monster.
Catching him off guard in a metaphorical, psychological web that she has spun for him.
So, Banner. That's your play.
What?
Loki means to unleash the Hulk. Keep Banner in the lab. I'm on my way. Send Thor as well. Thank you for your cooperation.
And then she can use her speed, guile, and even combat training when she has the upper hand.
Are you kidding? I'm working.
This takes precedence.
I'm in the middle of an interrogation. This moron is giving me everything.
I don't.
Give everything.
Let me put you on hold.
But nowadays, such notions of the true power of the feminine, which is to say, women overpowering men through their beauty, grace, elegance, and sex appeal, is considered playing into the male gaze and reinforcing harmful gender stereotypes and thus enabling toxic masculinity or something. Because if the Black Widows are just simply about brute force strength and speed, then essentially they just become slayers from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, female tough chicks with preternatural strength. And that's fine if that's the idea, but don't tell me that it makes sense why Dreykov selected only females for the program, because there's ever so slightly more females on the planet than males? What a bunch of bullshit. If anything, he would have selected them for the reasons I've outlined, which were the very strengths that embodied the character of Natasha Romanoff in the first place. This is not to say that a female agent is just eye candy or just a bimbo. Quite the opposite, actually. Because a female agent would lack the physical strength of a man, she has to be more tactical sometimes, and one of the tactics at her disposal is distracting and seducing a man with her charisma, looks, and sex appeal, in addition to all her other abilities. These could be used to great effect when trying to topple a powerful world leader or supervillain. And a female agent like Natasha would have to be more intelligent than a male agent who relies solely on brute force muscle. She's got to be more resourceful, strategic, and cerebral than her male counterparts. We're ultimately dealing with aspirational, fictitious, larger-than-life characters here, male and female archetypes that people have enjoyed watching for generations. James Bond may have seduced plenty of ladies over the years, but he also had to be careful around femme fatales, because their alluring physical beauty made them potentially dangerous to him also. He could easily fall prey to a particularly cunning and beguiling woman with an agenda all of her own. It's sad to say, but films like Black Widow essentially masculinize women and once again devalue the feminine, as they consider feminine qualities to be weaknesses rather than strengths. As for the performances and the characters, Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh do a fantastic job in their roles. For me, Pugh is a highlight. Yelena is a solid character, and her sarcasm and wit helps to elevate proceedings. Her heartbreaking reveal in Vostokov's house that her fake childhood was the only real thing in her life is genuinely moving. On that subject, Natasha talks to her fake mother about the fake Christmas presents she opened as a kid and how she remembers knowing they were fake but wanted to open them all anyway. That was a real tragic moment and definitely a major source of angst and depth for the character. But unfortunately, because Natasha doesn't ever get to reconcile and get to know her actual biological parents, she's forced to make do with reconciliation with her adopted parents. I think it speaks to modern Hollywood sensibilities when it comes to family that she settles for a surrogate family rather than seeking out blood relatives and trying to regain a sense of identity that she had been denied all her life. Black Widow is a disappointing final outing for the character of Natasha Romanoff, to add insult to the fact that her actual demise in Endgame is also deeply unsatisfying. As an MCU film, Black Widow is among the weakest, if not the weakest, I've watched. Something about the fights and action sequences largely seem uninspiring, and sometimes I thought the CGI just wasn't as good as previous films. Sometimes the film looked visually very strong, and other scenes just felt kind of cheap. And because the plot takes a while to get going, there's 2 or 3 action sequences at the start of the film that feel a bit random and disjointed. It takes about a half an hour before you fully understand what's going on, who's who, and where the plot is actually going. The first few action scenes feel like they were devised before much of the script had been written. And there's this stupid fight that Natasha and Yelena have for no reason when they first meet in this apartment. It's really vicious, and then suddenly they just stop and have a drink and chat like nothing happened. What was all that about? There's a long section in the middle of the film where Natasha and her adopted family meet in Vostokov's home. There's a lot of attempts at humour and sentimentality, and I feel they largely fall flat. But what made it even worse was that this entire section of the film really dragged on. It's seat-shiftingly uncomfortable. It is so boring and goes on and on. It's made worse by the fact that it makes for a sudden contrast in pacing from the very frenetic, action-packed opening of the film, and then there's the prison rescue scene where they retrieve Red Guardian, and they end up creating an avalanche that kills not only all the inmates, but all the guards as well. And then our heroes just fly away like nothing happened. Now, how can Natasha, an Avenger, possibly be okay with this? I mean, seriously? What the hell kind of ridiculous writing is this? Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have all of this action at the start, and then this incredibly slow bit in Vostokov's house. It just doesn't work for me. Anyway, considering the film tries to be more real and grittier than most MCU films, it sure descends into Bond-like cliches by the end, with a supervillain complete with secret lair above the clouds, and henchmen and explosions aplenty. Natasha manages to use some mind games on Dreykov, and there's a bit of a twist at the end, which allows them to turn the tables on him. After Yelena blows up his helicopter, Natasha deprograms Taskmaster, who happens to be Dreykov's daughter, by the way. Apparently years ago, in Budapest, Natasha had injured his daughter. There's absolutely zero emotional impact here. I don't know anything about Antonia. I'm not made to care about this character, so nothing about this conclusion feels important. The film ends with an epilogue 2 weeks later. Natasha meets with Mason one more time, and he gives her a Quinjet, which she then uses to fly off and help rescue the Avengers trapped on that floating prison island from the end of Civil War. So that takes things up to before Infinity War. In a final end credit scene, a new character introduced on Falcon and the Winter Soldier, whose name I haven't bothered to look up, meets with Yelena at Natasha's grave. She tells her that her next target is Clint Barton, the man she claims is responsible for Natasha's death. To be continued on the new Hawkeye show. Overall, Black Widow was a fairly painful experience for me. Boring, dull, highly derivative of other better MCU films in certain places, compromised by the mediocrity that comes with having to pander to modern feminism and making women out to be perennial victims of men. It's a very poor send-off for Natasha Romanoff. I actually would have preferred that her backstory remain a tantalizing mystery, rather than explaining it and doing the character such a disservice. It's a great shame because the cast is actually solid, but Natasha just isn't given a sufficiently heroic or meaningful swan song, and sadly, her crappy death in Endgame is permanent. Unfortunately, there's no magic get-out-of-dead-free card here. There were some fan theories that when Tony Stark snapped his fingers in Endgame, that he not only killed Thanos and wiped away his armies, but that he also resurrected Natasha by giving himself in her place. That would have been wonderful and just goes to show that fans can come up with much better ideas than what Disney is pumping out lately. So to sum up Black Widow as a film, bland. Bland all the way round.